Marcus Webb was alone at the Magdalena Ridge Observatory when the sky tore open. It was 2:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in October of 2024, and he'd seen thousands of celestial objects through those massive telescopes over his 22 years working there. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what descended through the darkness that night. The craft didn't fly. It materialized. One moment the sky was empty. The next, a structure roughly the size of a school bus hovered 300 feet above the desert floor, silent, glowing with a soft blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Marcus dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the concrete, but he didn't hear it. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to run, to hide, to call someone, but his legs wouldn't move. He just stood there, 43 years old, divorced, living alone in a trailer 15 miles from the nearest town, watching something that shouldn't exist slowly descend onto the rocky terrain beyond the observatory fence. The landing was soundless. No engines, no wind. Just a gentle settling onto the earth, as if gravity itself had politely made room. And then a doorway appeared. Not opened. Appeared. A rectangular section of the hull simply dissolved, revealing a soft, golden light from within. Marcus took 3 steps backward. His hand found the railing of the observation deck, and he gripped it so hard his knuckles went white. And then the being stepped out. Tall, maybe 7 feet. Humanoid, but wrong in all the subtle ways that made Marcus's stomach twist. The proportions weren't quite right. The head was slightly too large. The limbs were too long, too graceful. And the skin, if you could call it skin, had a faint luminescence, like pearl reflecting moonlight. The being turned its head and looked directly at him. Even from 200 feet away, Marcus felt the weight of that gaze. Those eyes were enormous, almond-shaped, completely black. No whites, no pupils, just infinite darkness that somehow felt aware, curious, and ancient beyond measure. Marcus wanted to scream. He wanted to run back inside, lock every door, call the police, the military, anyone. But something held him frozen in place, not physically. It was more like a deep knowing that running wouldn't matter, that this moment had always been coming, that his entire life had been leading to this exact point in time. What you're about to hear has been hidden from humanity for thousands of years. And I need to warn you, once you understand this truth, everything you thought you knew about the Bible, about Genesis, about why we're really here, will shatter completely. This isn't comfortable. This challenges everything the church, the government, and every authority figure told you was real. But if you're tired of the lies, if you're ready to see what's actually happening, you need to subscribe and turn on notifications right now. Because what happened to Marcus Webb that night in New Mexico will expose a truth so disturbing that powerful institutions have spent millennia keeping it buried. There's no going back after this. The being began walking toward him. Not walking, exactly. It moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy physics, as if each step was choreographed by forces Marcus couldn't comprehend. He should have run. Every survival instinct in his DNA screamed at him to flee. But instead, Marcus found himself climbing over the railing and walking forward. Slowly. His legs shook with each step. His heart hammered so violently he thought it might burst through his chest. But he kept moving, crossing the distance between them one terrifying step at a time. They met in the middle. Marcus stopped about 10 feet away. Up close, the being was even more otherworldly. It wore what looked like a seamless garment, metallic but flexible, form-fitting but not tight. There were symbols on the chest piece, geometric patterns that seemed to shift when Marcus looked at them directly. And those eyes, God, those eyes, they stared at him with an intensity that made him feel completely exposed, as if every thought, every memory, every secret shame was being read like an open book. Marcus tried to speak. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His throat was too dry. His vocal cords had forgotten how to function. And then he heard it. Not with his ears. The voice came from inside his head, clear and calm, like someone speaking directly into the center of his consciousness. Do not be afraid, Marcus Webb. I mean you no harm. I have traveled very far to find someone like you. Someone who watches the stars and wonders if we're really alone. Marcus staggered backward. His hand went to his head, as if he could somehow block out the intrusion. You're in my mind, he whispered, his voice cracking. How are you in my mind? The same way you hear your own thoughts. I'm simply placing mine where you can perceive them. It's the only way we can communicate. My vocal structure cannot produce sounds you would understand. Marcus felt his legs weaken. He looked back at the observatory, then at the craft sitting silently on the desert floor, then at the impossible being standing before him. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. He was having a breakdown, stress. Too many lonely nights, too many years of failed relationships and crushing isolation finally catching up to him. You're not having a breakdown, the voice said gently, responding to thoughts Marcus hadn't spoken aloud. This is real. I am real. And I've come because humanity is approaching a threshold, a moment of decision that will determine whether your species survives or repeats a cycle that has already destroyed civilizations before you. What? Marcus managed to force the word out. What are you talking about? I need to understand something about your species, something about what you believe and why you believe it. The being tilted its head slightly. I've been observing your world for some time now. You have a book, a sacred text that many of you follow. The Bible. Do you know it? Marcus nodded slowly. His grandmother had raised him Baptist. He'd spent countless Sunday mornings in church, though he'd stopped going years ago after the divorce. Good, the being said. Then I need you to bring it to me. I need to read it. Marcus stood there trying to process the request. An extraterrestrial being, something that had just traveled across impossible distances through space, wanted to read his grandmother's Bible. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh, but the sound caught in his throat and came out as a choked gasp instead. You want to read the Bible? Marcus finally managed to say. Why? You've crossed light years of space. You have technology that makes ours look like stone tools, and you want to read a 2,000-year-old religious text? Because it's not just a religious text, Marcus. The voice in his head was patient, almost professorial. Every civilization leaves records of its history, its understanding of reality, its encounters with forces beyond itself. Your Bible contains fragments of actual events, real history that has been reinterpreted, mythologized, and in some cases, deliberately obscured. I need to understand what you've been told, what you believe happened, so I can show you what actually occurred. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, despite the warm desert night. What actually occurred? You're saying the Bible is wrong? I'm saying it's incomplete, and certain passages are far more literal than your religious leaders want you to understand. The being took a step closer. Do you have access to this book? Marcus nodded slowly. I have my grandmother's Bible in my truck. She gave it to me before she died 3 years ago. I keep it in the glove compartment. I don't know why. Sentiment, I guess. Please bring it to me. Marcus hesitated. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was insane, that he should refuse, that he should run. But something deeper, something beyond logic, pushed him forward. He turned and walked back toward the parking area, his legs moving automatically, carrying him to his old Ford pickup truck parked near the observatory entrance. His hands shook as he opened the door and pulled open the glove compartment. There it was, the worn leather Bible, dark brown and cracked with age. His grandmother's name was embossed in fading gold letters on the cover, Ruth Elizabeth Webb. He'd watched her read from this book every morning for as long as he could remember, her lips moving silently as she traced the words with her finger. Marcus pulled the Bible out and held it against his chest for a moment. "Grandma, if you can hear me," he whispered, "I hope this isn't a terrible mistake." Then he walked back across the desert floor to where the being waited with infinite patience. He extended the Bible with trembling hands, the being reached out and took it. Those long, delicate fingers wrapped around the leather cover with surprising gentleness, as if handling something precious and fragile. "Thank you, Marcus. This means more than you know." The being opened the Bible to the first page. Marcus expected it to read the way humans read, slowly, carefully, page by page. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The being's eyes began to glow with a soft white light, and it started turning pages rapidly. Not skimming, not glancing. The pages flipped in a blur, faster than Marcus could track, a steady rhythm like a deck of cards being shuffled by expert hands. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. The pages flew by in seconds. Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. The historical books passed in a rush of fluttering paper. Marcus watched in stunned silence as the being processed the entire Old Testament in what couldn't have been more than 4 seconds. Then, the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. The Gospels passed in a blink. Acts, the Epistles, Revelation. And then the being closed the book gently and stood completely still. "How did you?" Marcus started to say, but the voice in his head cut him off. "My species processes visual information at a rate approximately 12,000 times faster than yours. What takes you hours to read takes me seconds to absorb and analyze." The being handed the Bible back to Marcus. "I've now read every word, every passage, every translation note in the margins your grandmother made." Marcus took the Bible back, clutching it tightly. "And? What did you find?" The being turned away, looking up at the stars scattered across the night sky. There was something in its posture that Marcus couldn't quite read. Sadness? Concern? For a long moment, there was only silence. The desert wind whispered across the rocks. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Marcus waited, his heart pounding, his mouth dry. Finally, the voice returned, quieter now, weighted with something that felt almost like sorrow. "Marcus, there's a passage in the beginning. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Do you know it?" Marcus tried to remember his Sunday school lessons from decades ago. Something about the sons of God and the daughters of men, and giants, the Nephilim? Yes. The being turned back to face him, and Marcus could swear those black eyes held something that looked like grave concern. "That passage, Marcus, is the most important warning in your entire Bible. And it's the one your religious institutions have worked hardest to make you dismiss as mythology, as metaphor, as anything except what it actually is." "What is it?" Marcus asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. A historical record, a witness testimony, a warning about what happened before, and the being paused, and those enormous eyes seemed to bore straight into Marcus's soul, and a dire prediction about what is happening again right now. The silence that followed was suffocating. Marcus felt the weight of those words settle over him like a heavy blanket. The desert suddenly felt colder. The stars above seemed to watch with silent judgment. And somewhere deep in his chest, in a place beyond rational thought, Marcus Webb knew with absolute certainty that his life had just changed forever, and there was no going back to the comfortable ignorance he'd lived in just an hour ago. Marcus's hands were shaking so badly, he nearly dropped the Bible. He fumbled it open, the worn pages falling naturally to a section his grandmother had clearly read many times. The spine was cracked there, the pages soft from decades of fingers tracing the words. He found Genesis chapter 6 and started reading aloud, his voice unsteady. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Marcus paused, his throat tight. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." Marcus looked up from the page. "I remember my grandmother reading this. She always said it was one of the most mysterious passages in the whole Bible. Nobody really knew what it meant. The Nephilim, the sons of God. It was all just, I don't know, ancient mythology. Stories that got mixed up with real history." "That's exactly what they want you to think," the being said, and there was an edge to the telepathic voice now, something almost like anger. "That's the lie that has been carefully maintained for millennia. Mythology, metaphor, symbolic language, anything to keep you from understanding what actually happened." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, though dread was already pooling in his stomach. The being moved closer, and Marcus had to fight the urge to step back. "Those words you just read are not mythology, Marcus. They are literal historical documentation, real events that occurred approximately 12,000 years ago, during what your archaeologists call the end of the last ice age. The sons of God were not metaphors. They were actual beings, physical entities from beyond your world." Marcus felt his legs weaken. "You're saying angels came down and had children with human women? That's what you're telling me?" "Not angels in the way your religions teach." The being's head tilted slightly. The term sons of God in the original Hebrew is Bene Elohim. It refers to beings from the heavenly realm, yes, but not servants of your God. These were entities from other worlds, other dimensions of reality, advanced civilizations that had mastered space and time, and some of them, the being paused, violated cosmic law by interfering directly with human development. "Interfering how?" Marcus's voice came out as barely a whisper. "By breeding with humans, by introducing their genetic material into your species. The offspring, the Nephilim, were hybrids, beings with abilities that humans were never meant to possess at that stage of evolution. Immense physical strength, extended lifespans, enhanced cognitive abilities, access to knowledge that primitive humans could not responsibly wield." Marcus backed away until he hit the side of his truck. The metal was cool against his back, solid, real. He needed something real to anchor him because everything else felt like it was dissolving. No, that's insane. That's something out of ancient astronaut theories. Crazy conspiracy stuff. Is it? The being's voice was gentle now, patient. Tell me, Marcus, why do ancient cultures all over your world have nearly identical stories? The Greeks called them Titans. The Norse called them Jotnar. The Hindus speak of the Asuras. Native American tribes tell of star people who came down and married earth women. Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki. Egyptian records mention beings who came from the sky. All separate cultures, no contact with each other, yet all telling the same story. Coincidence, Marcus said, but even he could hear how weak it sounded. Shared human psychology, common myths that appear in every culture, or shared memory of actual events. The being gestured toward the Bible still clutched in Marcus's hands. Your religious authorities dismissed Genesis 6 as myth because the alternative was too disturbing. If it was real, if beings from other worlds actually interbred with humans, then it meant your species is not what you think it is. It meant the neat categories of creation, of humanity being made in God's image, of the separation between earthly and divine. All of it becomes complicated, messy, uncomfortable. Marcus slid down until he was sitting on the ground, his back against the truck tire. His mind was racing, trying to find a way to reject this, to dismiss it, to maintain the worldview he'd carried for 43 years. Even if, and I'm not saying I believe this, but even if beings from other worlds came here thousands of years ago, why would that matter now? It's ancient history. Because it's not just history, Marcus. The being crouched down, bringing those enormous eyes level with his. The event documented in Genesis 6 wasn't isolated. It happened before the flood your Bible speaks of. And the flood, that wasn't divine punishment. It was a reset, a cosmic intervention to stop what was happening, to prevent the complete corruption of human genetics and consciousness. A reset? Marcus felt like he was drowning in information he couldn't process. The hybrid offspring, the Nephilim, they were corrupting everything, teaching humans forbidden knowledge, sharing technology your species wasn't ready for, creating weapons of unimaginable power, manipulating genetics not just in humans but in animals, creating chimeras, abominations. Your ancient texts hint at this. Giants, monsters, creatures that shouldn't exist. It all happened, Marcus, and it all had to be stopped before humanity was completely lost. Marcus pressed his palms against his eyes. This is too much. I can't. How am I supposed to believe any of this? The being stood. I can show you. Not just tell you. Show you what actually happened. I have access to records, holographic documentation that my people and others have maintained for thousands of years. We've been watching Earth for a very long time, Marcus. We were here when it happened. We witnessed the intervention. We saw what the Nephilim did and what had to be done to stop them. Show me? Marcus lowered his hands and looked up. How? The craft behind us has technology that can project recorded history, visual documentation of actual events. The being extended a hand toward him. But I warn you, what you'll see will destroy certain comfortable beliefs. Once you witness this, you cannot unsee it. You cannot return to the simple faith your grandmother had. Are you willing to pay that price for truth? Marcus thought of his grandmother, of her simple, unshakable faith. She died believing in a loving God who had everything planned, who had written a perfect book to guide humanity. What would she think of what he was about to do? Would she call it betrayal? Or would she, with her endless curiosity about God's mysteries, want him to see? He reached up and took the being's hand. The skin was warm, smooth, almost human. Show me, Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. Show me what really happened. The being helped Marcus to his feet and led him toward the craft. As they approached, the golden light emanating from the doorway seemed to pulse in greeting, warm and inviting despite Marcus's terror. He climbed through the opening, ducking his head even though the entrance was tall enough to accommodate the 7-foot being beside him. Inside was nothing like he'd imagined. No blinking lights or complex control panels, just smooth curved walls that seemed to be made of liquid metal, constantly shifting with subtle colors, deep blues flowing into soft golds. In the center of the circular room was a raised platform, and above it, empty air that somehow felt charged with potential. "Stand here," the being gestured to a spot beside the platform. "What you're about to witness is a holographic reconstruction of actual events. These are not interpretations or artistic renderings. This is recorded history, captured by observation technology far beyond what your species currently possesses." Marcus positioned himself where indicated, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. The being touched a section of the wall, and the smooth surface rippled like water. Symbols appeared and disappeared, and then the room went dark. For a moment, Marcus stood in absolute blackness, and panic surged through him. But then light returned, different light, natural light, and he gasped. He was no longer in the craft, or rather, he was, but the walls had disappeared, replaced by something else entirely. He stood in the middle of what looked like ancient Earth. The sky above was a different shade of blue, deeper, clearer than any sky he'd ever seen. The landscape stretched endlessly before him, lush and green, with mountains in the distance that looked wrong, too sharp, too tall, not yet worn down by millions of years of erosion. "This is Earth approximately 12,300 years ago," the being's voice explained. "Before the flood, before the reset, before everything changed." Marcus turned in a slow circle, marveling at the three-dimensional projection surrounding him. He could see details, individual leaves on trees, birds flying overhead that looked almost, but not quite, like modern birds. And then he saw them. The humans, small groups scattered across the landscape, living in simple settlements. They were primitive, wearing animal skins, using stone tools. But there was something in their faces, an intelligence, a spark that Marcus recognized instantly. These were his ancestors. "Watch," the being said softly. The sky began to change, not clouds forming, but something else. Points of light appeared, dozens of them, descending slowly through the atmosphere. They weren't meteors. They moved with purpose, with intention, decelerating as they approached the surface. Marcus watched one come closer, and as it descended, he could see it more clearly. A craft, similar to the one he'd just entered, but larger, more elaborate. It settled onto the ground half a mile from one of the human settlements, and a doorway opened. The beings that emerged took Marcus's breath away. They were beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Tall, perhaps 8 or 9 feet, with perfectly proportioned bodies that seemed to radiate light. Their faces were angular, elegant, with large eyes that shone with intelligence and something else, something that made Marcus uncomfortable. Pride, maybe, or entitlement. "These are the ones your Bible calls the sons of God," the being explained. "We call them the Watchers. They came from multiple star systems, part of a loose collective of advanced civilizations. They were sent to Earth as observers, to monitor human development, to ensure the natural evolutionary process proceeded without interference. But some of them," the being's voice grew heavy, "decided observation was not enough." Marcus watched as the beautiful beings approached the human settlement. The humans reacted with awe, falling to their knees, pressing their faces to the ground. The Watchers did not discourage this worship. In fact, they seemed to encourage it, gesturing for the humans to rise, to come closer. And then Marcus saw what happened next, and his stomach turned. One of the Watchers reached out and touched a young human woman. She looked up at the being with a mixture of fear and fascination. The Watcher smiled, and there was something predatory in that smile, something that made Marcus want to shout a warning across 12,000 years. But of course, it was too late. It had always been too late. They began breeding with humans within the first year. The being continued, not out of love, not even out of desire in the way you would understand it. It was arrogance. They believed they could improve humanity, accelerate evolution, create something greater by mixing their genetics with yours. But they violated cosmic law. Interference of this kind, direct genetic manipulation of a developing species, is forbidden by the councils that govern advanced civilizations. The scene shifted, time accelerating. Marcus saw the Watchers taking human women as mates. He saw children being born, and his blood ran cold. These children were enormous, even as infants. By the time they reached adolescence, they towered over normal humans, some reaching 10 or 11 feet tall. Their physical strength was immense. He watched one teenage Nephilim lift a boulder that would have taken 20 human men to move. But it wasn't just physical power. The Nephilim possessed abilities that terrified Marcus. He watched one of them heal a dying man with a touch, energy flowing from its hands into the injured person's body. He watched another one move objects with its mind, stones lifting and arranging themselves into complex structures without anyone touching them. And he watched another one do something that made his heart stop, speaking words that caused fire to appear from nothing, hovering in the air, dancing to the Nephilim's will. The hybrid offspring had access to abilities that operate at higher dimensional frequencies, the being explained. Telekinesis, energy manipulation, accelerated healing, even limited reality manipulation. These were gifts that normal humans at that stage of development should never have witnessed, let alone possessed through genetic inheritance. The scene shifted again. Now Marcus saw cities, but not primitive settlements. These were advanced structures, buildings made of massive stone blocks fitted together with impossible precision, temples that reached toward the sky. And everywhere, the Nephilim ruled as kings, as gods, with humans serving them, worshiping them, bringing offerings. They became tyrants, the being said. They taught humans forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, thousands of years before it should have developed, astronomy, mathematics, weapon making, and worse things, genetic manipulation. They began creating chimeras, mixing species that should never be mixed. Your ancient texts hint at this. Creatures that were part human, part animal. Abominations that corrupted the natural order. Marcus saw flashes of horrors, beings that looked like men with the heads of bulls, women with serpent bodies, things that should not exist, could not exist in any sane reality. And he saw war, the Nephilim fighting each other for territory, for power, using weapons that made modern artillery look like children's toys, energy beams that carved through mountains, devices that caused earthquakes, the sky itself burning. The corruption spread rapidly, the being continued. Within 500 years, nearly every human bloodline had been contaminated with Nephilim genetics. The natural evolutionary path had been completely derailed, and the Nephilim, drunk on power, were destroying the planet itself. Something had to be done. The hologram froze. Marcus stood in the middle of a frozen moment of chaos, surrounded by images of a world tearing itself apart. He realized he was crying, tears streaming down his face, though he couldn't explain exactly why. Grief, maybe. Grief for a humanity that had been violated, manipulated, corrupted by beings who should have known better. How was it stopped? Marcus whispered. The being's response was quiet, solemn. The flood, Marcus. But not the way your Bible tells it. That comes next. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself. The frozen holographic images around him flickered and then dissolved, replaced once again by the smooth interior of the craft. He felt exhausted, as if he'd just lived through those 500 years himself, witnessed every atrocity, every corruption, every moment of humanity's violation. The flood, Marcus said, his voice hoarse. You're saying it really happened? A global flood that wiped out the Nephilim and reset everything. Not entirely global, the being corrected, but catastrophic enough to eliminate most of the corrupted bloodlines and destroy the advanced civilizations the Nephilim had built. It was orchestrated by the Council of Advanced Species that govern this sector of the galaxy. They induced massive geological shifts, melted ice caps rapidly, triggered volcanic activity across multiple continents. Your myths remember it as 40 days and 40 nights of rain, but the reality was far more complex and devastating. And Noah? The Ark? Was any of that real? There were survivors, yes. Multiple groups in different regions who were warned and prepared. Your Bible focuses on one lineage because that's the lineage that eventually led to the Hebrew people who wrote the text. But there were others. The Sumerian texts speak of Ziusudra. The Akkadian texts mention Atrahasis. Hindu texts describe Manu. All the same event, different survivors, different perspectives. Marcus sat down on the floor of the craft, his legs unable to support him anymore. So it happened. The flood happened. The Nephilim were destroyed. Humanity got a second chance. That's horrible, but at least it's over, right? That's ancient history. The being was silent for a long moment, and that silence made Marcus's skin crawl. Right? He repeated, but the dread in his stomach told him the answer before the being spoke. Marcus, what I'm about to tell you is the real reason I came to find you tonight. The being sat down across from him, those enormous black eyes holding his gaze. The event in Genesis 6 wasn't the only intervention. It wasn't even the first, and it certainly wasn't the last. What do you mean? This has happened before, multiple times throughout your planet's history. Advanced beings descending, interfering with human development, creating hybrid offspring, corrupting natural evolution. The pattern repeats. The being gestured and new holographic images began to form, but these were different, scattered across time like beads on a string. Marcus saw ancient Egypt, beings that looked almost human but not quite, teaching humans to build massive pyramids, sharing knowledge of mathematics and astronomy. He saw what looked like South America, strange figures descending from the sky, local people carving their images into stone. He saw Asia, beings of light appearing to monks in monasteries, sharing wisdom that shouldn't have been available for another 1,000 years. After the Great Flood, there was a period of non-interference that lasted approximately 4,000 years, the being explained. Humanity was allowed to develop naturally, slowly rebuilding from the catastrophe. But then, around 8,000 years ago, small interventions began again. Not as blatant as the Watchers, more subtle, carefully hidden. Why? Marcus asked. If it caused such destruction before, why risk it again? Because some beings believe they know better than cosmic law, They see humanity struggling, evolving slowly, making mistakes, and they think they can help, accelerate the process, guide you toward advancement faster than natural development allows. But every time they interfere, it corrupts. It always corrupts. The holographic images shifted, showing different civilizations rising and falling. Marcus saw advanced societies that seemed too sophisticated for their time periods, possessing knowledge that shouldn't have existed yet, and then he saw them collapse, destroyed by wars or natural disasters, or simply vanishing from history, leaving only mysterious ruins behind. The pattern is always the same, the being continued. Intervention, rapid advancement, corruption, destruction, reset. Your planet has experienced at least 7 major cycles of this over the past 50,000 years. Each time, humanity climbs towards sophistication, receives help from well-meaning or arrogant outsiders, becomes corrupted by abilities and knowledge it isn't ready for, and then collapses. The survivors are left to rebuild from scratch, and the truth of what happened becomes myth, legend, dismissed as fantasy. Marcus felt something cold settling in his chest. 7 times? This has happened 7 times? At least, possibly more. The records are incomplete for the earlier cycles, but each time the story gets recorded by the survivors. Your Bible preserved Genesis 6. The Sumerian tablets describe the Anunnaki. The Book of Enoch, which your church removed from the canon, goes into even greater detail about the Watchers and their offspring. Hindu texts speak of the Nagas and their hybrid children. Mayan records describe beings from the stars teaching them astronomy. It's all there, Marcus, scattered across every culture, every ancient text, the same story told different ways. Then why doesn't anyone know this? Marcus demanded, frustration rising in his voice. If it's written in all these ancient texts, if the evidence is everywhere, why is it dismissed as mythology? Because the truth is dangerous to those in power. The being's voice took on an edge. Think about what it means if Genesis 6 is literal history. It means humans are not what religious authorities claim. It means your genetics have been tampered with. It means beings from other worlds exist and have influenced your development. It means the neat categories of creation, of divine separation between humanity and the heavens. All of it crumbles. Marcus thought about the churches he'd attended as a child, the priests and pastors speaking with absolute certainty about how humans were made, about how God had a perfect plan, about how the Bible was literal truth except for the parts that were clearly metaphor. And Genesis 6 was always explained away. Just ancient mythology, confused legends, not to be taken seriously. So the church covered it up, Marcus said slowly. Not initially. In the early centuries, these texts were taken seriously. The Book of Enoch was considered scripture by early Christians. Church fathers like Justin Martyr and Clement of Alexandria wrote about the Watchers as historical fact. But as the institutional church grew more powerful, as it became intertwined with political authority, the story became problematic. Why problematic? Because it gives humans too much agency. The being leaned forward. If beings from other worlds can interfere with human development, then humanity's story is not entirely in God's hands. If your genetics have been manipulated, then you're not purely divine creation. If advanced civilizations exist beyond Earth, then humanity is not special, not central to cosmic purpose. And institutions built on the premise that they alone hold the keys to salvation, that they alone interpret God's will, cannot afford that narrative. The holographic images shifted again, showing medieval councils, men in elaborate robes arguing over ancient texts, deciding which books would be included in the official Bible and which would be banned, burned, hidden away in vaults where common people would never see them. They fragmented the truth deliberately, the being said. They kept Genesis 6 but stripped it of context by removing Enoch and other supporting texts. They reinterpreted the Nephilim as metaphor or minor footnote. They taught generations that anything about giants or angels breeding with humans was just confused mythology from primitive people who didn't understand the world. And slowly, over centuries, the truth was buried under layers of doctrine and dogma. Marcus felt anger burning in his chest. So everything I was taught, everything my grandmother believed, it was all a lie? Not a lie exactly. The being's tone softened, more like an incomplete story, edited to serve purposes other than truth. The love your grandmother felt, the faith that sustained her, those were real. But the framework she was given to understand reality was deliberately limited. And now? Marcus looked up at the being. Why are you telling me this now? Why come here? Show me all this. Shatter everything I thought I knew. The being stood slowly, and those dark eyes seemed to hold infinite sadness. Because, Marcus, it's happening again. Right now, the 8th cycle has begun. And this time, if humanity doesn't recognize the pattern, if you don't understand what's occurring, this cycle might be your last. Marcus felt the floor of the craft tilt beneath him, though he knew logically it hadn't moved. Everything was spinning, his entire worldview collapsing like a building with its foundation ripped away. He pressed his palms against his temples, trying to hold his thoughts together, but they scattered like frightened birds. No, he whispered. No, you can't just say that and not explain. Happening again? What's happening again? But even as he asked, another part of his mind was screaming louder questions. Questions about his grandmother, about the woman who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 7. Ruth Elizabeth Webb, who had read to him from that leather Bible every night, who had taught him to pray before meals, who had promised him with absolute certainty that God had a plan, that everything happened for a reason, that faith could move mountains if you just believed hard enough. Was it all built on lies, on edited texts and hidden truths? On a version of history deliberately stripped of the parts that were too disturbing, too complicated, too threatening to institutional power? Marcus stood abruptly, stumbling toward the doorway of the craft. I need to get out. I need air. I can't. This is too much. The being didn't try to stop him. Marcus climbed through the opening and dropped down onto the desert floor, his legs barely catching him. He walked 20 feet away and then bent over, hands on his knees, breathing hard. The night air was cool against his face, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside him. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. The Bible is God's perfect word, Marcus. Every line, every verse put there for a reason. When you don't understand something, you pray about it, and God reveals the meaning in His time. But what if God's perfect word had been edited by imperfect men with political agendas? What if the meaning had been deliberately obscured, not by divine mystery, but by human manipulation? Marcus sank to his knees in the dirt. Grandma, he whispered to the stars. What do I do with this? How am I supposed to believe anything now? The being approached slowly, giving Marcus space but close enough that its telepathic voice could reach him gently. I understand your pain, Marcus. What you're experiencing is what many experience when comfortable illusions shatter. Cognitive dissonance. The mind rejecting information that contradicts deeply held beliefs. It's not just beliefs, Marcus said, his voice breaking. It's her. Everything she taught me. If this is true, if what you've shown me is real, then she spent her whole life believing something incomplete, something manipulated. She died with that faith. Was she wrong? Was her whole life wasted? No. The being sat down in the sand beside him. Your grandmother's faith gave her meaning, purpose, comfort. The framework was incomplete, yes, but the love was real. The connection she felt to something greater than herself, that was authentic. She simply understood it through the lens she was given. But I can't unknow what you've shown me, Marcus said, looking at the being. I can't go back to simple faith. I can't pretend Genesis 6 is just a metaphor. I can't walk into a church and listen to sermons about God's perfect plan, knowing that beings from other worlds have been manipulating human history for thousands of years. Then don't go back. The being's voice was firm but not unkind. Move forward. Seek truth even when it's uncomfortable. That's what real faith is, Marcus. Not blind acceptance of authority, but courageous pursuit of reality. Marcus picked up a handful of desert sand, letting it slip through his fingers. How do I even know you're telling the truth? Maybe this is the deception. Maybe you're the one lying, twisting scripture, leading me away from God. That's what my grandmother would say. She'd say Satan appears as an angel of light, that he deceives even the elect. That's a fair question. The being stood and gestured back toward the craft. Come, I'll show you how to verify what I've told you, not through my words or my projections, but through your own research, your own investigation. The evidence is all around you, Marcus. You've just been trained not to see it. Marcus hesitated, but curiosity and desperation pulled him back to his feet. He followed the being back into the craft. The holographic system activated again, but this time it showed something different. A map of Earth, with dozens of locations marked in glowing points of light. These are archaeological sites that official academia cannot adequately explain, the being said. Structures built with precision that shouldn't have been possible with the technology available at the time. Megalithic constructions that would challenge even modern engineering. The map zoomed in on Egypt. The pyramids of Giza appeared in three-dimensional detail. Look at the precision, Marcus. The blocks weighing 70 tons each, fitted together so tightly you cannot slide a piece of paper between them. Cut and moved with tools that officially didn't exist. Aligned with astronomical precision to constellations thousands of light years away. Your Egyptologists cannot explain how primitive humans with copper tools accomplished this. Ancient astronaut theorists, Marcus muttered, remembering late-night TV shows he dismissed as pseudoscience. Mock them all you want, but they're closer to truth than mainstream archaeology, which insists primitive humans moved million-ton blocks with wooden rollers and rope. The map shifted to South America, showing massive stone structures. Pumapunku in Bolivia. Blocks cut with such precision they appear machine-tooled. Sacsayhuaman in Peru. Stones weighing over 100 tons, fitted together in complex interlocking patterns. The hologram changed again, showing underwater structures. Off the coast of Japan, near Cuba. Submerged cities that predate the supposed beginning of civilization by thousands of years. Structures that could only have been built on dry land, meaning they sank when sea levels rose after the Great Flood. Marcus watched, his scientific mind starting to engage despite his emotional turmoil. But mainstream archaeologists have explanations for these things. They say ancient people were more sophisticated than we give them credit for. Sophisticated enough to independently develop nearly identical megalithic construction techniques on opposite sides of the planet with no contact? The being zoomed the map out, showing sites in Egypt, Peru, Cambodia, Easter Island, Turkey, all using the same precise stone-cutting methods, all aligned to specific astronomical configurations, all built in a time frame that coincidentally follows the post-flood period I described. That could still be coincidence, Marcus argued, but his voice lacked conviction. Read the texts, Marcus. The being pulled up images of ancient writings, Sumerian cuneiform tablets describing the Anunnaki coming from the sky, teaching humans civilization, the Mahabharata from India, describing flying vehicles called vimanas, and weapons that sound remarkably like nuclear devices. The Book of Enoch, removed from your Bible, giving explicit details about 200 watchers who descended on Mount Hermon and took human wives. The Popol Vuh from the Maya, describing gods from the stars who created humans through genetic manipulation. Marcus stared at the texts floating before him, all saying essentially the same thing in different languages from cultures separated by oceans and millennia. They all tell the same story, he whispered. Because it's not mythology, Marcus. It's fragmented historical memory. The being gestured, and the texts multiplied, dozens, hundreds appearing. Every major ancient culture has these records. Beings from the sky, hybrid offspring, advanced knowledge appearing suddenly. Your academics dismiss it because accepting it would mean rewriting history, admitting that human civilization didn't develop in the neat, linear progression they've constructed. Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not acceptance exactly, but the beginning of it. The rigid certainty that had been crumbling since the craft landed was giving way to something else. Openness, maybe, or just exhaustion with denial. If I accept this, Marcus said slowly, if I believe that Genesis 6 is literal history, that beings from other worlds interfered with humanity, that the flood was a reset event, what does that mean for God? Does God even exist in this version of reality? Of course God exists. The being's tone was almost amused. The source of all consciousness, the creative force behind the universe, what you call God, is absolutely real. But God is not a man on a throne in heaven judging your every action. God is the fundamental consciousness from which all reality emerges. The Watchers, the Nephilim, humanity, me, we're all expressions of that same source, operating at different frequencies, different levels of awareness. So Jesus, angels, heaven, hell, all of that? Real, but not the way your church teaches. The being moved closer. Jesus was real, a highly advanced consciousness that incarnated to teach humanity a better way. But his teachings were also edited, manipulated, turned into a control system. We'll discuss that later. Right now, you need to decide something fundamental. What? Are you going to cling to comfortable illusions because they honor your grandmother's memory? Or are you going to pursue truth, even though it shatters the framework you inherited? The being's eyes held his. Because what's coming, Marcus, requires people who can see reality clearly. Denial won't protect you. Only truth will. Marcus looked down at his hands, calloused from years of working with telescopes and equipment, hands his grandmother had held when he was frightened as a child, promising him God would keep him safe. And he made his choice. Show me, he said quietly. Show me what's happening now. Show me why you came. The being gestured toward the holographic display, and the ancient sites disappeared, replaced by something that made Marcus's blood run cold. Modern images, current events, things happening right now, in his world, in his time. The 8th cycle isn't hidden in ancient history, Marcus. It's unfolding all around you. Most humans can't see it because they've been conditioned to look at the pieces separately. never connecting them into the larger pattern. But when you step back and see the whole picture, it becomes undeniable. The hologram showed laboratories, sterile white rooms filled with equipment Marcus recognized from documentaries. Scientists in white coats working with microscopes, computer screens displaying complex genetic sequences, test tubes containing materials he couldn't identify. This is CRISPR technology, the being explained. Gene editing, tools that your species officially developed in 2012. It allows for precise modification of DNA, the ability to add, remove, or alter genetic sequences in living organisms. I know about CRISPR, Marcus said. It's used for medical research, treating genetic diseases, that kind of thing. That's the public narrative. The hologram zoomed in on specific labs, ones without identifying markers, hidden in nondescript buildings. But in classified facilities across your planet, genetic manipulation has progressed far beyond treating disease. They're creating designer humans, Marcus. Embryos modified for enhanced intelligence, increased physical strength, extended lifespans, resistance to disease. The exact same thing the Watchers did 12,000 years ago, now being done by humans who think they're pioneering new science. Marcus felt his stomach turn. That's illegal. There are international laws against human genetic modification. Laws that are being violated in dozens of countries. The hologram showed documents, official-looking papers with portions redacted. China openly experimented with gene-edited babies in 2018. That's what they admitted publicly. What do you think is happening in secret? Your military contractors are working on enhanced soldiers. Biotech companies are developing cognitive enhancements. Wealthy individuals are paying for genetic modifications to their children before birth. It's all happening, Marcus. The Nephilim are being recreated, not by outside intervention this time, but by humans playing God with tools they don't fully understand. The display shifted, showing something that looked like artificial intelligence interfaces, robots with unsettlingly human features, neural networks mapped in glowing lines of light. And then there's the merging of human consciousness with artificial intelligence, transhumanism, the belief that humanity can and should use technology to transcend biological limitations. Brain-computer interfaces, neural implants, the promise of uploading human consciousness into digital form, achieving immortality through technology. That's still science fiction, Marcus protested weakly. Is it? The being pulled up news articles, research papers, investment portfolios. Neuralink, OpenAI, DeepMind. Billions of dollars being poured into artificial intelligence research and human enhancement technologies. Your species is rushing headlong toward merging biological consciousness with artificial systems, creating something that is neither fully human nor fully machine, just like the Nephilim were neither fully Watcher nor fully human. Marcus watched as the hologram displayed various headlines and images he'd seen before, but never connected. Reports of AI systems developing unexpected capabilities, stories about children being born with unusual abilities, dismissed as statistical anomalies. Whistleblower claims about classified genetic research, labeled as conspiracy theories. Unexplained technological leaps that seem to come from nowhere. But humans are doing this, Marcus said. You said before it was outside beings interfering. This time we're doing it to ourselves. Are you? The being's tone carried something that might have been sadness. Look closer, Marcus. The hologram zoomed in on specific individuals, scientists, tech entrepreneurs, military officials. Where did the sudden leaps in technology come from? Your computer revolution in the 1940s happened suspiciously fast after certain alleged crashes in the desert. Your understanding of genetics accelerated dramatically after specific researchers had experiences they couldn't explain. Your artificial intelligence capabilities jumped forward in ways that even your leading scientists find puzzling. Marcus felt ice forming in his veins. You're saying someone is helping us again. Outside beings are sharing technology, guiding our development. Not someone. Multiple groups. Some believing they're helping humanity evolve faster. Others with more selfish motives, wanting to create hybrid populations they can control or use for their own purposes. And some, the being paused, simply watching to see if humanity will repeat the same mistakes, destroy itself again, prove that this species cannot handle power responsibly. The hologram shifted again, showing military installations, underground facilities, places that looked like they were designed to be hidden from satellite surveillance. And your governments know. Not all of them, not the public-facing politicians, but certain groups within military and intelligence communities have been in contact with non-human entities for decades. They've made agreements, exchanged technology for access, allowed experimentation on human subjects in exchange for advanced weapons systems. That's insane, Marcus said. But even as he spoke, he remembered stories his grandmother had mentioned dismissively. Roswell, Area 51, stories of government cover-ups and hidden alien contact. He'd always thought they were ridiculous. But what if they weren't? Your species received a warning in Genesis 6, the being continued. A clear historical record showing what happens when advanced beings interfere with human genetics and development. Destruction, chaos, the need for a catastrophic reset. And yet, here you are, repeating the exact same pattern with even more dangerous tools. CRISPR is more precise than anything the Watchers had. Your artificial intelligence has potential far beyond what they could achieve. And your weapons, nuclear, biological, electromagnetic, could destroy your planet dozens of times over. Marcus walked to the edge of the holographic display, images of modern laboratories and ancient Nephilim overlaying each other, past and present merging into a terrifying pattern. Why can't people see this? If it's so obvious, why isn't everyone talking about it? Because you've been trained not to see patterns, Marcus. Your education system teaches you to specialize, to focus narrowly on specific fields without seeing how they connect. Your media keeps you distracted with entertainment and manufactured conflicts. Your religions tell you that thinking about beings from other worlds is either fantasy or demonic deception, and anyone who tries to point out the connections is labeled a conspiracy theorist, dismissed, marginalized, sometimes silenced. The hologram showed social media platforms, news networks, educational institutions, all working in concert to fragment information, keep people from seeing the larger picture. And most importantly, the being said, you've been taught that humanity is at the peak of civilization, that your current level of development is unprecedented, that ancient people were primitive. This makes it impossible to recognize that you're following the exact same trajectory as previous cycles. Advanced technology, genetic manipulation, merging with artificial systems, warfare, corruption, all leading to the same inevitable conclusion. Which is? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Collapse. Reset. The being turned to face him directly. Unless something changes, unless enough humans wake up to what's happening and make different choices, this cycle will end like the others. Maybe not with a flood this time. Maybe with nuclear war. Maybe with an AI system that decides humans are obsolete. Maybe with genetic experiments that create something that hunts down and replaces natural humans. The method doesn't matter. The result is the same: destruction and the need to start over. Marcus felt the weight of it crushing down on him. Billions of people going about their daily lives, completely unaware that they were living through the same pattern that had destroyed previous civilizations. Working jobs, raising families, pursuing dreams, all while the foundations of their world cracked beneath them. "So what do we do?" Marcus asked quietly. "If this is really happening, if the pattern is repeating, how do we stop it?" The being's eyes held something that might have been hope mixed with uncertainty. "That's why I came to you, Marcus. Why I showed you the truth about Genesis 6. Because stopping it requires people who understand the pattern, who can see what's coming, who are willing to sound the alarm even when they're dismissed as crazy. But first, you need to understand something crucial about how these cycles work and why they repeat." Marcus stared at the holographic displays flickering around him, past and present overlapping in disturbing symmetry. "You keep calling the flood a reset event. My grandmother always taught it was God's punishment for sin, for wickedness. Noah and his family were saved because they were righteous. That's the story. That's the simplified version," the being said, and the hologram shifted to show the Earth from space. Continents arranged differently than modern maps. The flood wasn't divine punishment, Marcus. It was a necessary intervention to prevent complete corruption of the human genome and the destruction of your planet's entire ecosystem. Think about what I showed you. The Nephilim weren't just ruling as tyrants. They were fundamentally altering the genetic structure of all life on Earth, mixing species that should never be mixed, creating weapons that could shatter mountains, teaching humans knowledge that gave them power without wisdom. The hologram zoomed in, showing the antediluvian world in its final days, cities burning, strange creatures roaming landscapes, the sky itself looking wrong, filled with colors that shouldn't exist. If the Council of Advanced Civilizations hadn't intervened, if the reset hadn't occurred, there would be nothing recognizable left. Not just humanity destroyed, but the entire biosphere corrupted beyond repair. DNA of every species contaminated, the planet itself becoming uninhabitable. So they caused the flood to save the planet, Marcus said slowly. They caused the flood to give humanity another chance. The being's tone was solemn. But understand, Marcus, it wasn't the first reset and it wasn't the last. This is the pattern that repeats across your history. Advancement, corruption, intervention, reset. Then the cycle begins again. The hologram displayed a timeline, stretching back tens of thousands of years. Points along the line glowed brighter, marking significant events. Each time humanity reaches a certain threshold of technological capability, something happens. Sometimes it's outside intervention like the Watchers. Sometimes it's humanity discovering or being given advanced knowledge, but the result is always the same. Rapid advancement, followed by corruption, followed by catastrophic collapse. Marcus traced the glowing points with his eyes. How many times? How many civilizations rose and fell before ours? At least 7 major cycles in the past 50,000 years, possibly more. The being gestured, and the timeline expanded, showing rough outlines of lost civilizations. Some you have myths about: Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. Others left no records at all, wiped so completely that not even legends survived. Each one thought they were the pinnacle of development. Each one believed they had mastered nature, conquered the limitations of biology, achieved something unprecedented. And each one collapsed when they crossed certain thresholds without the wisdom to handle the power they'd acquired. "What thresholds?" Marcus asked. What specifically triggers the collapse? The being created a list in the holographic display, points appearing one by one. 3 critical thresholds appear in every cycle. First, genetic manipulation. When a species gains the ability to alter its own DNA or create hybrid forms, it approaches dangerous territory. Second, artificial consciousness. When they create or merge with artificial intelligence systems that match or exceed biological intelligence. Third, weapons of mass destruction. When they develop the capability to destroy their entire civilization or planet. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. We've crossed all 3. CRISPR for genetic manipulation, AI systems that are approaching human-level intelligence, nuclear weapons that could end civilization. Exactly. The being's eyes seemed to bore into him. Your current civilization has reached the same threshold that every previous cycle reached before collapse. You have the power to reshape life itself, to create artificial consciousness, to destroy your world many times over. And like every civilization before you, you've developed these capabilities far faster than you've developed the wisdom to use them responsibly. But we have safety measures, Marcus protested. International laws, ethics committees, regulations on genetic research and AI development. We're not just rushing forward blindly. Aren't you? The hologram showed news articles and research papers. In China, they're creating gene-edited babies. In the United States, military contractors are developing autonomous weapon systems. In private labs across your planet, researchers are pushing boundaries with no oversight. Your regulations exist, Marcus, but they're being ignored or circumvented by those who believe the potential benefits outweigh the risks. Just like every previous cycle. Marcus paced within the holographic display, images of modern laboratories and ancient ruins swirling around him. So what? We're doomed? Is that what you're telling me? That no matter what we do, we'll repeat the same pattern, make the same mistakes, end up destroying ourselves like all the others? No. The being's voice suddenly carried something Marcus hadn't heard before. Hope. That's not what I'm telling you. Because there's something different about this cycle, Marcus. Something that's never happened before in the 50,000 years we've been observing your species. What's different? You know the pattern. The being moved closer. Previous cycles collapsed because the people living through them couldn't see what was happening. They had no frame of reference, no historical memory of earlier resets. But you do. Your Bible preserved Genesis 6. Your ancient texts from cultures worldwide describe the previous cycles. The evidence is all around you. Archaeological sites that don't make sense, myths that all tell the same story, genetic anomalies that suggest hybridization events in your distant past. For the first time, humanity has the information needed to recognize the pattern. Marcus felt something stir in his chest, not quite hope, but something adjacent to it. So we can choose differently. We can see what's coming and change course. Potentially. But it requires enough people waking up to the truth. The being gestured and the hologram showed a curve, a line climbing steadily upward. There's a concept in social dynamics called critical mass. When approximately 10% of a population holds an unshakable belief, that belief spreads rapidly to the majority. Right now, maybe 1% of humanity understands what's actually happening, recognizes the pattern, sees the danger. If that number reaches 10%, there's a chance, a real chance, that your species makes different choices. 10%, Marcus repeated. That's 700 million people out of 7 billion. How is that possible when most people dismiss this as conspiracy theory or religious nonsense? It's possible, because the evidence is undeniable once people look at it without the filters they've been given. The being's tone intensified. The problem isn't lack of evidence. The problem is that people have been trained to reject evidence that contradicts their worldview. They've been taught that ancient texts are mythology, that archaeological anomalies are coincidence, that government cover-ups don't exist, that beings from other worlds are science fiction. Break through those filters, get people to actually examine the evidence, and the truth becomes obvious. Marcus thought about his grandmother, about how she would have reacted to all this. She would have called it deception, demonic lies designed to undermine faith. And how many millions of people would react the same way, rejecting truth because accepting it meant their entire belief system was built on incomplete information? You said there's a window of opportunity, Marcus said. How long? How much time do we have before this cycle collapses like the others? The being was quiet for a moment, and that silence was answer enough. Not long. Your genetic manipulation technology is advancing exponentially. Your AI systems are approaching the singularity point where they exceed human intelligence. Your geopolitical tensions are pushing toward conflicts that could go nuclear, and your planet's ecosystem is destabilizing from the strain of 7 billion humans consuming resources faster than they can regenerate. Multiple collapse triggers are converging simultaneously. Years, decades, Marcus pressed. If current trajectories continue unchanged, the hologram displayed projections, graphs with lines climbing toward critical points. You have perhaps 10 to 15 years before one or more of these triggers reaches the point of no return. Maybe a major war that devastates civilization. Maybe an AI breakthrough that leads to rapid replacement of human labor and social collapse. Maybe a genetic experiment that creates something that escapes containment. The specific trigger doesn't matter. What matters is that the window for changing course is closing rapidly. Marcus felt the weight of it settle over him like a physical burden. 10 to 15 years. 1 generation, maybe less. And if we cross that threshold, if we hit the point of no return, what happens? Another flood? Another reset? The being's eyes held infinite sadness. We don't know. The councils that govern advanced civilizations are divided. Some believe humanity should be allowed to face the natural consequences of its choices, even if that means extinction. Others advocate for intervention, another reset, preserving a remnant to start over. And some believe your species has had enough chances that if you can't learn the lesson after 8 cycles, perhaps you never will. That's not fair, Marcus said, anger rising in his voice. Most people don't even know the pattern exists. How can we be held responsible for mistakes we don't know we're making? That's exactly why I'm here. The being placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, the touch surprisingly warm and solid. That's why I showed you Genesis 6. Why I revealed the truth about the cycles, why I'm asking you to help wake others up. Because you're right. It's not fair to judge a species that's been deliberately kept ignorant, but ignorance won't protect you from consequences. The laws of cause and effect don't care whether you understand them. Cross certain thresholds and collapse follows, whether you saw it coming or not. Marcus looked at his grandmother's Bible, still clutched in his hand through all of this. The leather was warm from his grip, worn smooth by decades of her fingers turning these pages, reading words she believed with her whole heart. She always said faith could move mountains, that belief in God could change everything. She was right, the being said softly. But faith without understanding is incomplete. True faith means seeking truth courageously, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it contradicts what you were taught. Your grandmother had faith in the framework she was given. Now you have the opportunity for faith in something larger, deeper, more true than any institution could contain. Marcus took a deep breath. Okay, tell me what I need to do. The being gestured, and the holographic display shifted once more, pulling up the text of Genesis chapter 6, the words floating in the air between them, glowing softly. Marcus, the most important thing you need to understand is this. Genesis 6 wasn't just recording past events. It was a warning about the future. Your future. Right now. Marcus stared at the floating words. A warning? I thought you said it was historical documentation. It's both. The being moved closer to the text. Ancient prophets understood something modern humans have forgotten. Time isn't strictly linear the way you perceive it. Patterns repeat. History echoes. When the writers preserved this passage, they weren't just recording what happened before the flood. They were warning future generations. This will happen again. Watch for the signs. Recognize the pattern before it's too late. But the church always taught Genesis 6 as ancient history, something that happened and was dealt with through the flood. End of story. Because acknowledging it as prophecy, as a warning about future events, would require admitting that beings from other worlds exist and actively interfere with human development. The being pulled up another text alongside Genesis 6. The Book of Revelation. Look at the parallels, Marcus. Revelation speaks of the return, of beings descending from heaven, of a final conflict between forces of light and darkness. Your theologians interpret this as Jesus returning to fight Satan. But read it through the lens of what you now know about Genesis 6. Marcus read the passages floating before him, verses he'd heard countless times in church, taking on entirely new meaning. The return isn't one being coming back, it's multiple groups returning. The ones who interfered before, coming back to see what humanity has done with the time it was given. Exactly. Revelation describes this as spiritual warfare, but it's far more concrete. Different factions of advanced civilizations with different views on humanity's future. Some want to help you evolve, guide you toward higher consciousness. Others see you as experiments or resources to be controlled, and others believe you're a failed project that should be terminated before you spread beyond your planet and become a threat to the wider galactic community. Marcus felt his knees weaken. He sat down hard on the floor of the craft. So the second coming, the rapture, all the end times prophecy, it's actually about this? About alien civilizations returning to Earth? It's about the convergence point. The being sat across from him. When a species reaches the threshold you're approaching now, when they have the power to destroy themselves or evolve beyond their current limitations, there's always a moment of decision. Outside forces that have been watching, waiting, they reveal themselves. Some offer help, some offer domination, some offer nothing but judgment, and humanity must choose which path to take. But you're making it sound like it's not about God at all, like it's just, I don't know, cosmic politics or something. The being's eyes held his with an intensity that made Marcus's breath catch. It's absolutely about God, Marcus, but not the small God that religions have constructed. Not the God who sits on a throne judging individuals as worthy or unworthy. I'm talking about the actual source of all consciousness, the creative force that manifests as the entire universe. Your evolution as a species, your choice to align with higher consciousness or descend into destruction, that's fundamentally a spiritual question. The hologram shifted, showing something that looked like layers of reality stacked on top of each other, each one vibrating at a different frequency. Consciousness exists at multiple levels. Physical reality is the densest, slowest vibration. As beings evolve, they learn to access higher frequencies, higher dimensions of existence. What you call heaven isn't a place up in the sky. It's a higher frequency of consciousness that advanced beings can access. And hell isn't a pit of fire below ground. It's the lowest frequencies of consciousness, states of pure separation, fear, and suffering. So Jesus, when he talked about the kingdom of heaven being at hand, being within you, he was teaching humanity how to raise their consciousness, how to access those higher frequencies while still in physical form. The being leaned forward. Jesus wasn't the only teacher who understood this. Buddha taught it. Krishna taught it. Lao Tzu taught it. Every genuine spiritual master throughout history has been trying to show humanity the same thing. You are not separate from the divine source. You are expressions of it, temporarily experiencing limitation in physical form, and you have the potential to remember your true nature, to evolve beyond the cycle of destruction you keep repeating. Marcus pressed his palms against his eyes. Then why was this suppressed? If Jesus was teaching consciousness evolution, why did it get turned into a religion about sin and punishment and needing to be saved by someone else? Because institutions built on power don't want empowered individuals. The hologram showed medieval churches, ornate buildings filled with gold, while peasants starved outside. If people understand they have direct access to divine consciousness, if they realize they don't need intermediaries, then priests and pastors and religious authorities lose their power. So the teachings were edited, reinterpreted, turned into systems of control. The display shifted, showing councils of men in elaborate robes deciding which texts to include in the official Bible, which to ban, which to burn. They kept the parts about sin and judgment and the need for salvation through the church. They removed or reinterpreted the parts about direct experience of the divine, about humanity's potential for godlike consciousness, about beings from other realms interfering in human affairs. They turned Genesis 6 into incomprehensible mythology and Revelation into fear-based prophecy about a vengeful God destroying most of humanity. So people would be afraid, Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. So they'd be dependent on the church to save them from God's wrath. And so they'd never look up at the stars and wonder if those ancient texts about beings descending from heaven were literally true. The being stood, and the hologram dissolved, leaving just the two of them in the quiet interior of the craft. But now you know, Marcus. You've seen the evidence, you understand the pattern, and you have a choice to make. What choice? Whether to share this knowledge or keep it to yourself. The being's tone grew serious. If you speak about this publicly, you will be dismissed as crazy by most people. Your credibility will be attacked. Religious authorities will call you deceived or demonic. Scientists will call you a conspiracy theorist. The comfortable life you have now will become complicated, difficult, possibly dangerous. Marcus thought about his quiet existence at the observatory, his simple routine, his isolation that had become comfortable over the years. And if I say nothing? If I just go back to my life and pretend this never happened? Then you carry the knowledge alone, watching as the pattern unfolds, as humanity rushes toward the same catastrophic threshold that destroyed 7 previous civilizations. Maybe you'll be comfortable in your silence for a while. But when the collapse comes, and it will come if nothing changes, you'll know you had the chance to sound the alarm and chose comfort instead. Marcus stood, his legs steadier now. You said critical mass is 10%. One person can't wake up 700 million others. No, but one person can wake up 10, and those 10 can wake up 100, and those 100 can wake up 1,000. The being moved toward the doorway of the craft. The information is all there, Marcus. The archaeological evidence that mainstream science can't explain. The genetic anomalies in human DNA that suggest ancient hybridization. The ancient texts from every culture telling the same story. The modern evidence of genetic manipulation, AI development, outside contact. You just have to help people see the connections, recognize the pattern. How? How do I even begin? Start with those who are already questioning, already sensing something is wrong with the official narratives. The being's telepathic voice softened. There are millions of humans right now who feel the disconnect between what they're told is true and what they observe. They see the archaeological mysteries and wonder. They read ancient texts and sense something deeper than mythology. They watch technology advancing in leaps they can't quite explain. These are your audience, Marcus. These are the ones ready to wake up. Marcus clutched his grandmother's Bible tighter. And the religious people, the ones like my grandmother who would see this as heresy? Some will never accept it, and that's okay. But others will recognize that what you're sharing doesn't destroy faith. It expands it. It doesn't diminish God. It reveals a God far greater than any church could contain. A God big enough to create billions of galaxies, to express consciousness through countless forms, to allow free will even when beings make terrible choices. The being reached out and touched the Bible in Marcus's hands. Your grandmother loved God with her whole heart. That love was real even if the framework was incomplete. Honor that love by pursuing truth courageously, by helping others see what's really happening, by giving humanity a chance to break the cycle. That's what she would want if she could see what you've seen tonight. Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. What if I fail? What if I can't reach enough people? Then you fail having tried, which is infinitely better than succeeding at remaining silent. The being turned toward the doorway. I have to leave soon, Marcus. My time here is limited. But before I go, you need to understand one final thing about what's coming and why your actions matter more than you realize. Marcus followed the being to the doorway of the craft, the cool desert air rushing in to meet them. Above, the stars blazed with an intensity that seemed almost alive, as if they were watching, waiting to see what choice he would make. What final thing? What else do I need to know? The being turned to face him, those enormous black eyes reflecting the starlight. The window for changing course is closing, Marcus, but it's not closed yet. The next 5 to 10 years are critical. If enough humans wake up, if enough people recognize the pattern and make conscious choices to develop wisdom alongside power, your species can break the cycle. You can become the first civilization on Earth in 50,000 years to pass through this threshold without collapsing. And if we don't, if we fail to reach critical mass, then the reset comes, maybe through war, maybe through environmental collapse, maybe through a technological singularity that replaces biological humans with something else. The method doesn't matter. The result is the same. Another cycle ends, and whatever survives has to start over from a much lower level of development. Marcus looked out at the desert, at the observatory, where he'd spent 22 years studying distant stars. never imagining that beings from those stars had been studying humanity all along. You've been watching us for thousands of years. Why not just intervene directly? Why not land in Washington, D.C. or Beijing? Announce yourselves to the whole world. Force humanity to wake up. Because forced awakening isn't awakening at all. The being's tone carried ancient wisdom. Consciousness evolution must be chosen freely. If we revealed ourselves globally, many humans would worship us as gods, just like they did with the Watchers. Others would panic, attack, descend into chaos, and the lesson, the fundamental lesson your species needs to learn, would be lost. What lesson? That power without wisdom is destruction. That technological advancement without spiritual development is suicide. That you cannot solve problems at the same level of consciousness that created them. The being placed both hands on Marcus's shoulders. Your species keeps seeking external salvation, someone or something from outside to save you, fix you, tell you what to do. But the answers have always been internal. The kingdom is within, Marcus. The power to break the cycle exists within human consciousness itself. We can't give that to you. You have to claim it yourselves. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling over him like a physical mantle. So, I go back. I start sharing what I've learned. I try to wake people up one conversation at a time. Yes. Start with the evidence that's hardest to dismiss. The being gestured, and suddenly Marcus's phone, which he'd left in his truck, materialized in the being's hand. I've uploaded files to your device. Archaeological, images, scientific papers, ancient texts with translations, satellite imagery of sites that don't match official timelines. Share these. Let people see the evidence that mainstream institutions ignore or explain away. Plant seeds of questioning. The being handed him the phone. And share your experience, but carefully. Don't lead with, "I met an alien." Lead with, "I've discovered a disturbing pattern in ancient texts and modern events." Show people the evidence first. Let them reach their own conclusions. Truth that people discover for themselves is far more powerful than truth that's forced upon them. Marcus pocketed the phone, his mind already racing with how to begin. What about you? Will I see you again? Will you come back? I don't know. The being looked up at the stars. There are protocols, rules about contact with developing species. I've already pushed boundaries by showing you what I have. But if you succeed, if humanity reaches critical mass and chooses evolution over destruction, then yes, full open contact becomes possible. Your species joins the galactic community as partners, rather than subjects or resources. And if we fail, then I'll mourn for a species that had so much potential, but couldn't overcome its own self-destructive patterns. The being moved toward the craft. One last thing, Marcus. When you share this, expect resistance, especially from religious authorities and those invested in current power structures. They'll call you crazy, demonic, dangerous. But remember, truth doesn't need belief to be true. It simply is. Your job isn't to convince everyone. It's to reach those who are ready to hear. Marcus nodded, though fear and uncertainty churned in his stomach. The being climbed into the craft, then paused at the doorway. Your grandmother would be proud of you, Marcus. Not for abandoning faith, but for having the courage to seek truth even when it's terrifying. That's real faith. That's what the divine source wants from conscious beings: courage to grow, willingness to evolve, the strength to choose wisdom over ignorance, even when ignorance is comfortable. And then the doorway dissolved. The craft lifted silently, hovering for a moment above the desert floor. Marcus watched as it rose higher, faster, and then in the span of a single heartbeat, it was gone. Not flying away. Just gone, as if it had folded through dimensions beyond his perception. Marcus stood alone in the desert at 4:37 in the morning, his grandmother's Bible in one hand, his phone in the other, his entire worldview shattered and rebuilt into something larger, more complex, more terrifying, and somehow more hopeful than anything he'd imagined. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the observatory going through the files the being had uploaded. Hundreds of images, documents, translations, evidence that would take him weeks to fully process. And he began writing, trying to organize the information into something coherent, something he could share without sounding completely insane. 8 months passed. 8 months of careful research, of connecting with others online who were asking similar questions, of sharing evidence in forums and discussion groups, of slowly, cautiously building a network of people willing to look at the pattern. Marcus lost some friends who thought he'd lost his mind. His supervisor at the observatory grew concerned about his obsessions. But others listened. Others looked at the evidence and saw what he saw. He started a small website, nothing fancy, just a place to compile the evidence. Archaeological sites that defied explanation, genetic studies showing anomalies in human DNA, ancient texts from dozens of cultures telling identical stories about beings from the sky, modern developments in CRISPR technology and artificial intelligence, the parallels between current events and the antediluvian world described in Genesis 6. The site grew slowly at first. Dozens of visitors, then hundreds, then thousands. People sharing it with friends, discussing it in online communities, adding their own research and observations. Marcus wasn't alone anymore. He was part of something larger, a growing network of people who saw the pattern and refused to look away. Now, 12 months after that night in the desert, Marcus Webb sits in his small apartment, the worn leather Bible on the desk beside his computer. He thinks about his grandmother often, about her simple faith, her absolute certainty that God had a plan. And he realizes she was right, just not in the way either of them understood. God did have a plan for humanity to evolve, to grow beyond its limitations, to learn the lessons it kept failing to learn across multiple cycles of civilization. The question was whether humanity would finally listen, whether enough people would wake up to break the cycle, whether critical mass could be reached before the window closed. Marcus opens his laptop and begins typing another post for the website. Genesis chapter 6, 4 verses that most people skip over or dismiss as mythology. But what if it's the most important warning in human history? What if it's describing something that happened before and is happening again right now? Let's look at the evidence. He publishes the post and leans back in his chair. Somewhere out there, people are reading, questioning, beginning to see the pattern. One by one, consciousness by consciousness, the critical mass grows, and maybe, just maybe, humanity has a chance. Because the return isn't one being coming from the sky to save everyone. The return is humanity awakening to the consciousness that Jesus, Buddha, and every genuine spiritual teacher tried to show us. The return is recognizing that we're not separate from the divine, that the power to break the cycle has always been within us, that Genesis 6 wasn't mythology, it was history and prophecy, and a warning that still echoes across 12,000 years, begging us to finally listen before it's too late. Marcus Webb chose to listen. He chose to share. He chose courage over comfort. Now the question is, will you? Will you look at Genesis 6 with new eyes? Will you research the evidence that mainstream institutions dismiss? Will you recognize the pattern unfolding around you right now? the genetic manipulation, the artificial intelligence, the technological power without wisdom? Will you be part of the critical mass that breaks the cycle, or will you choose the comfort of denial until it's too late? The choice, as always, is yours.